Part 17. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 164. Subai walked out directly with the mahogany box in his arms. Suner followed him subconsciously, but Subai suddenly stopped and said, "I'm going alone." This attitude and tone were like two people who had just rolled over each other in bed, the man pushing the woman clinging to him away and complaining about the heat. Suner was stunned for a moment, watching Subai open the door and walk out. She bit her lip and didn't follow her. She just shouted, "The car is parked outside, you can use it directly." After Subai walked out, the soldier driver had already got out of the station and was standing aside, holding the car key in his hand. Subai took the car key, opened the door and got in. No matter what, Subai didn't know how much effect his threat could have on Wang Shui. Now that he had found the binding object, he was just a little short of completing the task. If Wang Shui looked away first, if Subai just left, all his efforts would be in vain. After the car drove out, Subai had a red light all the way, and there were traffic police at some intersections. They originally wanted to chase him, but after chasing for a while and seeing Subai's license plate number clearly, they all silently stopped following. This kind of tacit understanding and sharp eyesight. They still have them. Subai was happy to have some leisure time. This was not a game. He didn't have time to play with the traffic police in the car racing scenes in movies. Suner also saw that Subai was in a hurry, so he lent his car to Subai. This convenience comes at critical moments. Hurrying slowly, when Subai drove the car to Chu Zhao's community, nearly 20 minutes had passed. These 20 minutes were very torturous for Subai. He got out of the car, picked up the mahogany box, and Subai rushed upstairs. When he arrived at the door of Chu Zhao's house, Subai stopped shouting and kicked him over. The door was kicked open. Subai saw the nanny lying on the ground. The nanny's body had extremely serious spots on it. It means she has been dead for a long time. In fact, she has been dead for a long time. The appearance of these corpse spots is extremely normal. This means that the thing that resurrected the corpse before is gone, or something else happened. Subai opened the little nanny's body, his face was livid, and he became very ferocious, but there was a fingerprint on the unintentional position, and there was a fierce aura constantly coming from the fingerprint. It was this a fingerprint abruptly broke away the little nanny's soul, or the soul of that thing. Someone has been here. It was obvious that such fierce fingerprints and techniques could not be done by Xiao Hui. The aura of a zombie would never be like this. Subai had a say in this. Standing up, there was no one else in the living room except the body of the nanny. Subai walked to the bedroom door and opened the bedroom door. Xiao Hui just sat beside the bed in the bedroom, quietly. Subai walked over and pushed Xiao Hui gently. Xiao Hui just lay on the bed, motionless. "Oh shit. I'm late." "She left anyway." Subai clenched his fist so hard that his knuckles turned white. Finally, with a long sigh of relief, Subai simply sat down on the edge of the bed. Xiao Hui was still lying quietly. Subai shook his head. All the hard work was in vain. Subai didn't have many things that he couldn't think about. Nowadays, everything can be done by looking forward. Moreover, if you really want to make a detailed calculation, Subai will not necessarily lose. After getting a blood jade that is obviously very helpful to his vampire blood, even if he fights strictly speaking, losing 150 story points of bullets is not considered a loss, it is even a gain. It's just that I'm still a little unwilling to accept it. I've been running around in the West as a bad detective for so long, but this woman actually thought of relief before I succeeded. It's really a thorn in the bottom of a woman's heart. Subai opened the mahogany box. Inside there were tapes, hairpins and other things for girls, as well as a note. It was a pity that the handwriting on the note was not very clear, but he could still make out the general meaning. Subai saw that the records in Chu Jiangguo's notebook had similar meanings. It seemed that the other party had indeed completely copied the first killing game experience. "Tell me, should I burn this piece of paper to you or bury it with your body?" Subai said to himself. "You will be free when you are free. Why should you drag your niece into the burial? It was agreed upon at the beginning. After you are freed, you will give your niece a healthy body. Why are you taking her to the underworld now? You are such an elder, so unkind." As Subai spoke, he took out the lighter, lit the flame, and put the note over. As soon as the note burned, Subai seemed to suddenly think of something, and quickly shook his hand to extinguish the flame. Due to the quick rescue, the note was only burned in a small corner. Subai's face slowly became serious, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "No, that's not right." Subai continued to hold the note in his hand, and spread his hands, hanging down on the edge of the bed. "How could I forget such an important detail? The first time I used this substance as a toxin, the second time I also used this substance. It is also clearly recorded in the medical records. You were after you returned to school. It's just that your condition has worsened. It's impossible for you to lose all consciousness and your intelligence and brain power to completely deteriorate in an instant. Those people spent so much effort to find out what the poisoning was, and it took them a month to find it. As a victim, you are also a participant. Why don't you speak out? And, most importantly, why don't your friends speak out? If you knew earlier that it was poisoning by a substance and received targeted treatment early, you would not have died at all. This has become a paradox. What did you do, or what were you thinking about, that caused you to not say what kind of poisoning it was, and your best friends also remained silent?" Subai stretched out 4 fingers, one of which was separated from the other 3 by a little distance, which meant 2 groups. One group only included Wang Shui, and the other group included Ahong Ali and Yuan Yuan. Sunur's elder is a person who speaks well even when he is about to die. There is no need to lie when explaining the funeral affairs to his favorite junior before death. This is meaningless. What I mean is that Sunur's elder, Ahong, said it. It should be correct, but she may not have said it comprehensively and omitted a lot of things. Subai's eyes narrowed slightly, and his voice became deeper. After one point is determined, the other points can continue to be placed. 20 years ago, you 4 girls started this killing game for pure stimulation. In the end, because of the fear of the other 3, because I saw the evil in human nature, and because I saw that the classmates I usually get along with could have such a dark side, I was afraid and retreated, and chose to end the game. However, there was one person who did not choose to terminate, but continued. She even had her first experience and was able to start over again, but it was just a little more complicated and troublesome because she was just one person and had no helpers. Before, she had to do all the things for the 4 of them by herself, so she did it very slowly. However, unfortunately, what she did was discovered by the other 3 girls. I don't know what she wants to do, nor what her purpose is, but this purpose scares the 3 girls. Even, as a last resort, the 3 girls decided to use the money they accumulated from the first killing game. Information and target people to play a real killing game on her. Part of Chu Jiangguo's notebook was obtained through his investigation, and the other part was actually summarized by him based on his reasoning as a criminal policeman for so many years. There must be a lot of subjective elements in it. For example, Wang Shui, the cause of your death was finally found to be poisoning by his substance, so Chu Jiangguo deduced that the last substance used in the first killing game was also his substance. However, if you think about it from another angle, what if the substance used in the first killing game is not a substance, but other types of toxins? Therefore, as a victim, as a participant in the first killing game, you, Wang Shui, even if you know that you have been poisoned, you still don't know what kind of poison you have been poisoned. This is why when you react to the poisoning in the first few days and you are still awake, you are still powerless. When the toxins begin to take effect, when your mind begins to lose consciousness, everything you have can only be left to the parents and doctors around you, who will continue to try and reason. Finally, more than a month later, with the help of the emerging internet method, from abroad, experts from the University Medical Center confirmed that it was poisoning by a substance, but after finding a way to help you expel the toxin from your body, you still couldn't withstand the strong impact of the toxin on you, and eventually died. As for the 3 girls who participated in the first killing game with you, as the real murderers, it is naturally impossible for them to tell the news. In this way, everything. It all makes sense. No, there is one more thing, wait. A ring appeared in Sudbai's palm. It was made of something unknown. It had a strange style and looked weird. It was Xiao Hui who had thrown it when he triggered the real-life mission from Xiao Hui in the toilet. This is the ring that came out. Actually, although I don't know what kind of ring this is, I can use the method those people used to find out what kind of poison you were poisoned to imitate. Now it's easier and faster. Taking out his mobile phone, Sudbai opened the browser and entered Baidu Picture Scanner. Then he took a photo with the ring and confirmed the search for similar pictures. Soon, a series of pictures of rings with the same shape appeared. Oh, that's it, Sudbai suddenly realized. At this time, Xiao Hui, who seemed to have lost his mind, slowly, from bed, sat up. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 165. One of the messages I retrieved from my mobile phone pointed directly to a blog link. Blogs were very popular for a period of time, but were later basically replaced by Weibo, and not many people use them now. The blog that was searched is also very old. This blog post was from 2007, which is almost 10 years ago. There is a photo in the blog post, and there is also a ring in the photo, in the same shape as what Sudbai is holding. This one is very similar. Well, judging from the description, it's not a precious thing, much worse than a diamond ring. It's just a strange shape with a special meaning. Oh, it turned out to be a couple's accessory from Zixia. No wonder it doesn't look like a diamond ring to me. It seems to have a religious connotation. It's not bad, it's low-key, luxurious, and has connotation. I can't tell. Which man were you romantically involved with back then? Sudbai raised his hand and held the ring above his head. At this moment, Xiao Hui sat up, and the ring appeared in front of her. Her face began to turn livid, and the temperature in the bedroom began to drop sharply. Sudbai continued talking to himself. Interesting, interesting. The person you want to kill should be another man who owns this ring, and that man's status is not ordinary, so. Sudbai shook his head and smiled. What a bloody plot, can you be a bit promising? Wang Shui, isn't pastoral feminism popular recently? You can learn from them, so that you won't end up like this. By now, things are very clear. Wang Shui was in love with a man at school. Something went wrong in the end. Wang Shui planned to take revenge and kill people. Wang Shui even proposed this killing game in the first place. At that time, the other 3 girls were all pursuing excitement, and Wang Shui had actually made up her mind to kill someone, but not herself, but her former sweetheart. I have to say that those who can find this kind of ring and know how to use this kind of ring as a token of love are considered a very classy person. Most people will read ancient Zixia books and study Zixia culture. After all, the Zixia kingdom had a gap in history. It was not until the Middle and Late Qing dynasty that a scholar found some clues about the Zixia kingdom. Later, after research and excavation by Russian explorers and Russian historians, they finally made the Zixia kingdom. The existence of Zixia has been truly discovered. Most people now know a lot about Zixia from Jin Yang's novels. However, more than 20 years ago, the research on Zixia was not so practical. It was possible to be so proficient in Xixia culture at that time. BGE is as highbrow as when people talk about space technology today. Opposite Chu Zhao's community, there is a tea restaurant. Su Jiaqin, wearing a white suit, is sitting here. Opposite him, his aunt is sitting. Su Jiaqin picked up a tissue and gently wiped the corners of his aunt's mouth. The aunt smiled back at Su Jiaqin and held Su Jiaqin's hand tightly. It could be seen that she was very nervous. "Auntie, it's okay. Even if she really breaks out and wants to take revenge on you, I will stop her." Su Jiaqin turned to pick up a glass of orange juice with his other hand and took a sip. His eyes were deep. Qin Yiming failed. This was beyond Su Jiaqin's expectation. It was hard for him to imagine that a person with a task completion level of 6 could be ruthless. The gambler actually died at the hands of a listener whose task completion degree was only 2, and the other party was still able to continue the real task alive. Su Jiaqin didn't care much about the loss of Bloodjade. What he cared about was his aunt, a woman who had raised him since childhood and was more like a mother than his own mother. Moreover, she was still Su Jiaqin's woman, both mentally and physically. Physically, they are his sustenance and favorite, so he will not allow this matter to explode in the end and directly affect his aunt. For him, he can really do anything. However, feeling that the aura in the community that was about to die out suddenly began to rise rapidly again, a touch of anger and a deep sense of helplessness also emerged in Su Jiaqin's heart. "I went further to that house first, and Aunt Lily, who had just passed away not long ago, came back to life through the corpse." It seemed that the influence of the real-life mission of the terrorist broadcast had brought together all those people from back then, whether they were human or female. Ghost. Even though Su Jiaqin is now a listener with a task completion score of 10, able to see and foresee some things, and react to them, he still cannot stop everything that is being pushed behind the scenes by the horror broadcast. "I have already dispersed Aunt Lily's soul, and I have personally resolved Wang Shui's grievances in my own way. She should be about to disappear and completely return to her ashes. However, now, everything that could have ended has actually come back to life again. Without directly affecting the progress of the actual task, Su Jiaqin has tried his best. He may have been contaminated by some causes and effects, but it is still within the tolerable range. He didn't dare to directly intervene in this matter, so he asked Qin Yiming to take action at the cost of Bloodjade, because there would be a big hurdle at the mission completion level of 10, and Su Jiaqin was afraid of getting into trouble at this juncture. "With such a big cause and effect, I might not be able to survive the next story world. By then, who will take care of my aunt?" After putting down the orange juice, Su Jiaqin's brows did not relax. He was hesitating and hesitant. At the same time, he also carried a touch of resentment. It was just a realistic mission. How meaningful could it be to flatter a terrorist broadcast? "Do you have to rekindle the fire I put out? Young Master Su doesn't know that someone else has just put out the fire and lit it for him. Of course, if he knew, young Master Su would still do it, and his subjective initiative would be stronger, regardless of whether he could gain much from it. Perhaps giving up the actual task and seeking an exchange of benefits from the other party is the greatest expression of interest, but Subai will still choose to continue to light the fire. Who has ever asked someone to kill him? This is not the first or second time that Subai has done something that harms others and does not benefit oneself. What's more, there are some benefits to doing real tasks, right?" Wang Shui's face was already extremely ferocious, and Subai's resentment was completely ignited at this moment. Finally, she stretched out her hand and held the ring in her hand. Realistic mission accomplished. The warning tone of the horror broadcast appeared in Subai's mind. Subai breathed a long sigh of relief. He was finally done with his work. He patted his butt. Young Master Su stood up and looked at the bed with his hair fluttering. The whole person seemed to be filled with resentment. Wang Shui, who came out of the water, can also call her Xiaowai. Perhaps, when Xiao Hui threw this ring to herself, she also had a deep meaning. The bonding object was actually always with her, but Wang Shui's resentful soul had lost a lot of memory and was damaged. The bonding object must match the final truth. In other words, only by matching the appearance of that man can it act as a real bond. In Xiao Hui's eyes, 2 lines of blood and tears flowed down. Subai lowered his head and said nothing, but gently opened the window. Outside, the sky was already a little gloomy, and thunder and lightning could be seen dimly flashing. This reminded Subai of the thunder that the monk caused in the previous story world to deal with the zombie king. This sky thunder scared even the zombie king at first. Wang Shui couldn't avoid it, because it was not the fat man who triggered the sky thunder. Perhaps, this is the original intention of the horror broadcast. It is not to let Wang Shui free herself and then disappear, but to make up for Wang Shui's lost memory, stimulate her completely, and then in Tianli in the middle, it completely disappeared. Subai suddenly remembered what the horror broadcasters said most often, that good and evil will be rewarded in the end. As soon as he thought about this, a smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. That scary radio broadcaster that speaks seriously and promotes positive energy all day long is actually more ruthless, more cruel than anyone else, and more unkind than anyone else. Lily, are you dead? Wang Shui said. The sound was very hollow, as if breathing from hell. Subai nodded. You should have talked about it in the end. Where's Ahong? Wang Shui asked again. Subai waved the small note in his hand. This is what she left behind. She never married. Where's the last one, Yuan? Subai shrugged. I don't know, do you know? Wang Shui nodded seriously and walked to the window. Even Subai, a vampire, felt very cold and even a little unbearable standing next to Wang Shui at this time. She was sitting outside. There has always been a connection between her and me. I was her nightmare. Actually, it's not necessary, Subai said, you don't have much time left. In the end, when the thunder comes down, you will disappear into thin air, and your niece will also have to die like you. Why bother? Your parents and relatives are still alive, so you can take advantage of this time to visit them. If you are too far away and can't make it in time, if you have anything you want to pass on, you can tell me first. By the way, I don't have anything else, and I still have a lot of money. Wang Shui looked at Subai. You are a more cold-blooded person than me. You should understand me. If someone killed you back then and you had the chance to wake up again, what would you do? Subai sighed, shook his head, then showed a very relieved and sad expression, and said word by word, kill his whole family. Wang Shui smiled, her teeth turned red, and her smile was very sad. Yes, kill her whole family. Wang Shui's figure turned into a black wind and blew out of the window. Subai was not disappointed that he didn't persuade the person to come back. He didn't care anyway. He just picked up the phone and dialed Sunar's number. Hey, how are you doing? Don't talk about it yet. Let me ask you something. In 1994, there were people who were studying at university in Shanghai and majored in history. They are relatively famous now. Can you think of anyone? Sunar said a name without hesitation. Subai swallowed and blew a breath. Then I can really understand those 3 girls. Haha, if it were me at that time, I would have stopped this crazy woman. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 166. Subai lit a cigarette and stood by the window. The clouds outside were getting thicker and thicker. For ordinary people, it was a sudden thunderstorm. It was just another mistake by the meteorological station and it did not predict it in advance. But for the people inside the bureau, to humans, this dark cloud and the rumbling sound within it herald an end. There is no right or wrong, or perhaps there is no absolute right or wrong. Subai held his hands on the windowsill, his eyes a little distracted. There are too many things in this world where there is no absolute distinction between right and wrong. Whether it is between people or between countries, absolute justice and absolute evil are more like the snow-capped stars dotting the two high mountains. Most of them are actually filling in the gray area. The phone was still on, and during the call, Sunar seemed to be able to feel Subai's state of mind at this time, which was also very quiet. However, when he heard the thunder coming from Subai's side, he was a little surprised and said, "Is it raining over there?" "Yes," Subai responded. In front, Subai had already felt the collision of two powerful auras. Everything may have become clear. Someone wanted to protect Yuan, so he stopped himself from continuing this realistic task. "Give it a go." Subai touched the tip of his nose and smiled. "Actually, I am a very unprincipled person. If the other party takes the initiative to contact me in advance and promises some benefits to let me give up this practical task, it is not impossible. But the other party seems to feel that there is no need to talk nonsense with a low-level audience like himself, and directly seeks someone to kill him, then, I'm sorry." Regarding the situation over there, Subai did not go to watch, nor did he think of picking up the leaks. On the one hand, there were not many bullets in his Hellfire shotgun, and on the other hand, Subai knew that a duel of that level you are likely to be in trouble. You have already received a lot of benefits, so don't be too greedy. Sitting down on the bed in Chu Zhao's bedroom, Subai suddenly remembered that Chu Zhao was still locked up in his own home. Subai still didn't know how to explain this to Chu Zhao, but after thinking about it, he didn't need to explain too much. Before leaving, Chu Zhao was still in a coma. Subai also said hello to Jixiang and asked Chu Zhao to continue to coma. The reason given was that he was afraid of disturbing the little guy's rest. Thinking about it, Jixiang should do it in order for the little guy to take a peaceful nap. Chu Zhao would not be allowed to wake up and yell. Unknowingly, his relationship with the horror broadcast had begun to affect and radiate his relationship in the real world, but Subai didn't care very much, even though he valued his friendship with Sunar and Chu Zhao, but friendship is now considered a luxury for him. Boom. 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 3 roaring sounds came out, a bit harsh, and the aura belonging to Wang Shui disappeared completely. Subai reached out and touched his chin, stood up, and left Chu Zhao's bedroom. In the living room, the nanny's body was going to stink if it was not disposed of. Subai picked up the body and randomly found a suitcase to put it in. Then he pushed his suitcase and walked out of Chu Zhao's house. Subai didn't care much about disposing of the corpse, because it was considered the tail end of the real task. The terror broadcast would be erased and would not have any impact. The reason why he did this was simply to keep his friend's house clean. Subai pushed the suitcase to the trash can and that was it. The rain started to fall. I don't know who won and who lost in that brief confrontation. His hair was already wet from the rain, but Subai didn't care. He took out his car keys from his pocket and planned to leave. He would go back to his home first and untie Chu Zhao before talking about anything else. Previously, thunder and lightning made the magnetic field signal here very unstable, and the call between Subai and Sunar was also interrupted. At this time, Sunar sent a WeChat message. "Is the matter over?" "It's over," Subai replied. "Then when will you come back to London with me, to cultivate?" "It depends on the schedule." "I have no objection. Besides, I have to take my child with me." "Well, okay, I'll make arrangements." Just as Subai was about to start the car, a woman's face suddenly appeared outside the car window. It was Xiao Hui. Subai unlocked the car door. Xiao Hui opened the door and sat in. Her whole body was wet. At this time, Xiao Hui no longer had any resentment or ghostliness, and even her nails returned to normal. It seems that your aunt really has a conscience, Subai teased. Xiao Hui looked at Subai. Where is Chu Zhao? You still want to find him? He's my boyfriend. Subai took a deep breath. As his friend, I hope you stay away from him. You are just his friend. You have no right or qualification to make a choice for him. My aunt was completely stunned and completely disappeared under the thunder and lightning. She broke through the man's obstruction and came to the woman. As a result, instead of killing that woman, she chose to give up. Bullshit, Subai commented. Take me to find Chu Zhao, Xiao Hui repeated. Subai nodded, then grabbed Xiao Hui's hair and pressed her face against the car window. At the same time, he opened the drawer in the car with his other hand, took out a gun, and pointed it at the back of Xiao Hui's head. This car belongs to Sunur, and there is a gun in the car, which is normal. You still want to find him? You still want to find him? Don't think you are very realistic about some things, but you can always find out. You deliberately found connections and were assigned here, and deliberately got close to Chu Zhao. You knew clearly that your body had mutated at that time, but you took the initiative to approach him. You knew clearly that his body began to weaken because he was with you, and his yang energy was absorbed by you, but you continued to follow him. You just see that he is the son of Chu Jiangguo, and Chu Jiangguo was the person in charge of the original case. There was a look of pain on Xiao Hui's face, and her face was pressed against the window like a pie by Subai. But after listening to Subai's words, Xiao Hui just continued to repeat indifferently. Take me to find Chu Zhao. Subai smiled, licked his lips, and lowered his voice. Do you really think I won't kill you? After the real mission was over, Subai felt that the consequences of killing an insignificant ordinary person should be within his tolerance. Kill me. Xiao Hui's eyes were very calm. Obviously, after experiencing this incident, she seemed to have lost her desire for life. Now she has nothing to do with Wang Shui and has become ordinary people, however, are more like a walking zombie than before. At the last moment, Wang Shui chose self-liberation and redemption, gave up revenge on Yuan, and left behind his niece. He was completely annihilated in the thunder. However, Wang Shui's emotions, Wang Shui's memory, and the influence of sharing the same body with Wang Shui for a long time still deeply affected Xiaowei. Wang Shui left, and Xiao Hui's energy and spirit also disappeared all at once. Okay, I'll take you to find Chu Zhao. Subai let go of his hand, threw the gun under the passenger seat, and then started the car. Xiao Hui calmly sat down again and looked ahead expressionlessly. The wipers kept swiping back and forth, and outside the car window, it was raining continuously. Subai was not driving very fast, and kept tapping his knuckles on the steering wheel. He was hesitating and thinking. Subai rarely hesitated to kill Xiao Hui and reorganize Chu Zhao's life. Is what Subai thinks is the most correct way, but Xiao Hui is right, she is just Chu Zhao's friend, and she is really not qualified to help Chu Zhao make such a decision, unless Subai does not intend to want Chu Zhao as a friend anymore. Half an hour later, Subai's car arrived in front of his house. You sit here first. Subai opened the car door and swiped his card to enter the house. The little guy was sitting on the sofa watching TV. When he saw Subai coming back, he excitedly waved his little arms on the sofa. Subai walked over and picked up the little guy. The little guy also hung his hands around Subai's neck and made out with Subai very affectionately. Jixiang was lying on the stairs, looking at the scene below, still aloof. Putting the little guy back on the sofa, the little guy continued to watch TV very sensibly. Subai pushed open the door of the side sleeping room on the first floor. Chu Zhao was tied to the chair, with his head tilted, as if he was sleeping soundly. On Chu Zhao's forehead, one can clearly see cat's paw prints, not blood marks, but slight marks. Obviously, even though he and Subai almost fell out before, Jixiang still listened to Sudbai's words and kept Chu Zhao sleeping until now. Sudbai reached out and wiped away the claw marks on Chu Zhao's forehead. Chu Zhao's eyelids trembled a few times and slowly opened. At this time, Sudbai had already untied the rope from his body. "What happened?" "I fell asleep at your house." Sudbai didn't answer, just walked out of the bedroom door silently, and then sat down on the sofa. Jixiang just came over with an ice cream in his mouth, and the little guy was digging into it. After Sudbai sat down, the little guy took the initiative to lean towards Sudbai, and then handed the ice cream to Sudbai. Sudbai took it with a smile, took the wood chips from the coffee table, took a bite and put it to the little guy's mouth. Chu Zhao also walked out of the bedroom while rubbing his neck. "How long have I been asleep?" Chu Zhao wondered. However, he still didn't get an answer from Sudbai. Abai, I'm asking you something." "Zai is in the car outside," Sudbai said. "Oh." Chu Zhao didn't know what happened to Sudbai, and he didn't continue to think deeply. Instead, he opened the door and saw the car parked in the rain, and the woman sitting in the passenger seat of the car. Wei Chu Zhao trotted over in the rain. Seeing Chu Zhao running towards her, Xiao Hui's originally lifeless face showed a smile, a self-deprecating smile. When Chu Zhao was still a few meters away from the car, Xiao Hui raised her hand. In his hand, there is a gun. Then, when Chu Zhao rushed over and was about to open the car door, Zai put the muzzle of the gun into her mouth. 2 lines of tears flowed from his eyes. She took one last deep look at Chu Zhao. The trigger was pulled. Boom. Chu Zhao froze on the spot, looking at the blood and brains splashing out of the cab. His whole body felt like he was being shocked by electricity. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 167. In the cafe in the departure hall of Pudong International Airport, Suner was sitting there alone, with a cup of coffee and a snack in front of her. She was wearing a pair of sunglasses and kept away from strangers, making her look very cold. A young man came over pushing a light blue suitcase and sat down in front of Suner. Suner took off his sunglasses, looked at Sudbai in front of him, and said with some surprise, "I thought you wouldn't be in good spirits these days, but I didn't expect you look good." Sudbai was not polite and put the little guy on his feet first, then reached out to take the coffee in front of Suner and took a sip. "Isn't this good for me? I heard that Chu Zhao has been drunk and making trouble at your house every day for the past few days, looking for you. How did you cope with it?" Suner asked curiously. Sudbai smiled. "On the first day, I drank with him, and he asked me why all night long, but I didn't answer. The next day, he got drunk and knocked on my door. I beat him up. He came back on the 3rd day and was beaten up again. He came back on the 4th day and was beaten up again. Done. Well, he didn't come on the 5th day. Why? I broke his legs," Sudbai said with a smile. Suner nodded, "Very strong." "I just have a clear conscience," Sudbai told the truth. If it weren't for Chu Zhao, he would not have been involved in this real mission. To Chu Zhao, he had fulfilled his duty as a friend, and he definitely had a clear conscience. Although there are some things that are inconvenient to fully explain to Chu Zhao, but this does not make Sudbai feel that he should be like a holy mother who has done good deeds and has to be willing to be wronged and misunderstood. Chu Zhao's leg was crippled by Sudbai's hard blow. It was not a big deal. He would be fine just lying in bed for half a month. There would be no sequelae. Sudbai could still master this point of propriety. Because the real-life mission is over, there will no longer be restrictions on some matters related to the parties involved, and the terrorist broadcast will no longer wipe their butts. Chu Jiangguo, who previously didn't know that his son was missing, found out that his son's leg was injured. In anger, he almost wanted to arrest him, but Chu Zhao persuaded him to stop. "You didn't go to Zaiwai's funeral either." "What's the point of going?" Sudbai took out the plane ticket nonchalantly, It's almost done, we can go and wait to board the plane. Suner did not continue to question Subai about the previous matter. She actually had more contact with Chuzhou, but as a woman's sensitivity, she did not choose to ask further. After getting on the plane, Subai settled the little guy and Ji Xiang, and then closed his eyes to rest. Suner's seat was in the economy class, not with Subai. In Suner's words, since he was wearing a military uniform, he acted accordingly. I have to keep a low profile. If someone takes a picture of me wearing a military uniform and sitting in first class or something like that, the domestic internet will be furious and criticize me. It's not worth the loss. As for Subai, he doesn't have this problem. He is not a civil servant, and he is indeed very rich. Although he is not obvious on the rich list, but for Subai's daily consumption habits, he really doesn't know how to do it. There are worries about lack of money. On the plane, Subai did have a good sleep. Although his sleep was not very deep, it was still quite comfortable. After the plane flew smoothly, the little guy lay on Subai's lap. When Subai woke up, I found that the little guy's saliva had wet his pants. Gently picking up the little guy and smelling the milky fragrance of a child, Subai felt that his mood had calmed down. Perhaps, only when he was with this little guy could he truly find peace. Bar. After the plane landed, Suner gave Subai an address, and then she went to the embassy to report first. After all, she was on business and couldn't be Subai's tour guide. Of course, Subai didn't need a tour guide. The address Suner gave was a psychological research institute. The first string of English names made Subai feel a little dizzy. It wasn't that Subai couldn't understand, it was just that he had been living and dying in the story world for a long time. After a lot of tossing and then a lot of real tasks, and now suddenly coming to a foreign country again, I always feel a little mentally exhausted, as if I have entered another story world. After breaking up with Suner, Subai went to the hotel where he had booked a room. In fact, he owned real estate in London, but it was always more convenient to stay in a hotel. The little guy seemed very curious about so many foreigners on the street. He lay on Subai's shoulder and kept looking around with his little eyes. When he got to the room, Subai just put him on the bed and went to the bathroom to wash himself. When I came out, I found that the little guy climbed down from the bed and went to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the scenery outside. For him, the world is still unknown and mysterious, with a strong sense of curiosity. But for Subai and many other people, the world is actually tired and means too much and heavy pressure. I'll have Western food with you today. There was a carpet on the floor, so Subai wasn't worried about the little one bumping into it or catching a cold. Besides, Ji Xiang was watching from the side. However, just when Subai walked to the phone and was about to make a call to order a meal, the phone called him first. Ringed. This was the phone number in the hotel. Subai pressed the speaker phone. Do you remember me? The woman's voice on the phone sounded a little lazy, as if she had just woken up. Remember? Of course Subai remembered that it was Sophia, and there was a magic wand in his suitcase, and he planned to come here to trade with Sophia. That's good. I saw some of today's information and found out that you were on that plane. Not bad. I thought you were just an ordinary person in reality, but I didn't expect that you were actually in your country. So rich? No, actually your group also has some industrial cooperation in the UK. Although Subai is very low-key in China, there are some things that cannot be hidden. If an invisible rich man like him goes abroad, and a person with a sensitive identity like Suner goes out on a plane, he will definitely attract attention. The British side it would not be difficult for some special investigation departments to find out Subai's identity and information. Aren't you very particular about human rights? Subai asked, as his information was monitored and leaked. These are all polite words to coax voters, and there have been too many stray dog refugees in the past 2 years. If we continue to pay attention to protecting privacy, London will become like Paris, where there will be a terrorist attack. China, are really, although they are obviously one of the countries that signed the contract, they have no practical measures to accommodate them, otherwise we in Europe would not have to be so tired. Okay, ask those refugees to cross the Qinghai-Tibet plateau and we will welcome them with both hands, Subai also joked. Let me take a look. Wait, by the way, you have made an appointment at a psychological institute. It's really interesting. You are the first person I have seen who took the pressure in the story world and then took the initiative to go abroad to search psychotherapy audience. Sophia laughed to herself as she spoke. I brought the things. You come to the hotel. I don't want you to bring anything. Just come to me and help me redeem some things from the WeChat store. Okay, please open the door. Subai was stunned for a moment, then smiled, walked to the door, and opened the room door. It happened to be at the opposite elevator entrance. The elevator door opened. Sophia, who was holding a phone in one hand and a folder in the other, stepped on red high heels came over. Sophia rolled her eyes at Subai, charmingly, then walked into Subai's room and sat down on the sofa. I want to take a look at things first, okay? Don't worry, I won't do some dirty tricks, and you should also know that it doesn't benefit anyone to quarrel with the audience in the real world. Subai opened his suitcase and took out his wand. Wait a minute, I'm also interested in the string of beads in your suitcase. Okay, let's trade together. Subai was also very happy. Originally, he planned to trade the string of beads with Fatih, the Taoist priest, but now it is more convenient to trade them together. The wand and bracelet were placed on the coffee table by Subai. How much do you want? Sophia smiled. 200 story points, Subai said. Too expensive? No two prices, Subai said directly. 150 story points, Sophia said. Subai smiled and said nothing. At this time, Sophia's cell phone rang. She made a pause gesture and then answered the phone. Well, I'm at, the gang from the LM Vampire Club started partying again. Okay, I understand, I'll deal with it right away. Subai's ears twitched when he heard the word Vampire Club. In the West, there are many young people who worship vampires. Most of these people have nothing to do with vampires, but they worship and are obsessed with vampires, so there are many vampire clubs. Some extreme ones even organize people to suck blood, or even bleed each other. Sophia didn't know that Subai had vampire blood. In that story world, Subai and Sophia had been in different reincarnations and rarely met. In the end, they rushed out of the forest to go to the convenience store together. Subai was also in the state of zombie blood. Rather than a vampire state with weak attack power, Subai can be sure of this. However, Sophia's occupation is obviously unusual, a bit similar to the domestic national security. With Sophia's special identity, she may be involved in supernatural incidents, which also means that the vampire club may be really unusual. Sophia hung up the phone. Subai was about to say that 150 story points were fine, but he had to take me to that club, but Sophia spoke first. It's a deal for 200 story points, but you have to accompany me to the vampire club to deal with some things. I will accompany you to story point 250, Subai said reluctantly. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 168. Sophia didn't come by car, but by riding a motorcycle. She looked wild and domineering, which was in line with Sophia's own temperament. She put a helmet on her head, and then gave Subai a helmet. Subai looked at it and said, I don't need to wear it, right? I had a friend who said the same thing 8 years ago. Then what? His brains were knocked out. Subai put on the helmet silently and sat on it, leaning on Sophia's back. Sophia is not that kind of thin woman, nor is she that kind of pony, but is similar to a Western woman with a slightly plump temperament and an Oriental aesthetic, So she doesn't have a lot of flesh on her body, but she doesn't make people feel too heavy. Panic. Subai subconsciously hugged Sophia's waist with both hands. Sophia was stunned for a moment and didn't say anything. Instead, she stepped on the accelerator and the motorcycle roared out. Sophia was very fast and ran through red lights all the way. Because of her good driving skills and fast acceleration, she didn't cause any traffic accidents. About a quarter of an hour later, the motorcycle drove into an old London street. London is an ancient city that also retains a lot of ancient flavor. After driving here, Sophia subconsciously lowered her speed, which reduced the roar of the motorcycle a lot. Finally, we stopped in front of a pub on the side of the street. "Get off the car," Sophia said. Subai got out of the car and took off his helmet. "I guess I got a lot of fines along the way." Sophia shook her hair indifferently. "You still have this privilege." Immediately afterwards, Sophia opened the door and walked into the tavern. Subai also followed in. The style of the tavern was more similar to the medieval decoration pattern, which seemed a bit depressing, but also filled with a wild atmosphere. There are not many guests, and they are scattered here, some drinking wine and some listening to songs. There was a short boss with a beard standing there at the bar. If he were shorter, he could have directly gone to work as a walk-on in The Hobbit. "Dear sir and madam, what would you like to drink?" Sophia walked to the bar and motioned for Subai to come over. Subai came over. Sophia grabbed Subai's shoulder very affectionately, then lowered her head and kissed Subai's shoulder. Subai was a little confused, but then a tingling sensation made Subai understand. What on earth was Sophia going to do? When Sophia moved her head away, Subai found 2 blood marks on her shoulders. The blood flowed out, not a lot, but it was clearly visible. Sophia reached out her hand and gently wiped the corners of her mouth with great satisfaction, and licked her lips with her tongue, with all kinds of amorous feelings. When the bar owner saw this scene, he smiled happily, and then changed to a more kind attitude. "Where's your letter of introduction?" Sophia took out a badge with a vampire's head on it and placed it on the bar table. The hotel owner took the badge in his hand and played with it, then put it back. Then he reached out and knocked the bell on the table, and a waiter came over. "Take the 2 distinguished guests to the back." The waiter made an invitation gesture, and then led Subai and Sophia to the back of the bar. After entering the wine cellar, there was an elevator at the deepest point. The elevator was hidden behind the wine racks and was completely covered. The waiter also pressed a button to make the wine racks move away to reveal the elevator. The waiter pressed the elevator button and the elevator door opened. "2 guests, please." Subai and Sophia walked into the elevator. The waiter closed the elevator door with a smile. He did not follow them, but chose to turn around and go back. The elevator begins to descend. Subai looked around and saw that there were many vampire decorations in the elevator, which made people feel a little expectant. "You seem to be more interested in vampires than I expected." Sophia took out her mobile phone at this time, only to find that the mobile phone signal was completely blocked. It is estimated that except for Kongbu 66, a public WeChat account for terrorist broadcasts that can transmit messages regardless of distance signals, the rest of the time, mobile phones are basically useless here. "Just curious," Subai said with a smile, and then asked, "Your badge is quite good." "That's the badge of one of their members. He was killed by us when he was sucking people's blood. We took it away. You can use this badge as a letter of introduction. As long as you participate in one event, you will be awarded your own medal." "The person you killed was a real vampire, right?" Subai asked. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "What do you think?" "The elevator is almost at the bottom floor," Subai sighed. "What on earth do you mean?" "What I mean is very simple. This badge has the aura of a vampire. I guess there should be a drop of blood of the owner of the badge hidden in it, but now it conveys a lifeless smell, which is completely different from the rhythm of vampire blood. If this club was really formal and upscale and there were many real vampires, I think they would have discovered it. Sophia took a deep breath, and her face suddenly darkened. Sudbai, why didn't you tell me earlier? Sudbai reached out and flicked the Q-tooth mark on his shoulder that was bitten by Sophia. You didn't tell me about this earlier. It doesn't matter if you bite me once, but it's meaningless if you bite me on the shoulder. The rest there is a certain part that I welcome. Ding. The elevator descended to the ground floor and the door was about to open. Sudbai's face also became serious, and there was an aura of indifference in his eyes. Sophia grabbed Sudbai's wrist at this moment. The people in this club are all high-class people, and there are even members of the royal family. Killing them will cause too much trouble. The elevator door slowly opened. Whoosh! 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 3 crossbow arrows shot directly over, and the crossbow arrows penetrated directly into the iron sheet of the elevator, very deep, which is enough to show the power of the arrows. 3 men wearing masks stood at the door of the elevator, but they felt suspicious that there was no one in the elevator at all. One of the people walked into the elevator to check, but at this moment a hand reached down from the top of the elevator and grabbed his neck, and then lifted him up. With Sudbai's current strength, lifting an ordinary person was really a piece of cake. Moreover, Sudbai really felt a touch of vampire aura from this person. It was very light, very mottled, and not pure at all. This kind of vampire blood would probably make people feel a little more energetic, or even a little bit energetic. It has no function to help the body heal. The other 2 masked men immediately raised their crossbows again, but 2 vines appeared directly under their feet, entangled themselves and flicked them hard, and the 2 men were immediately thrown to the ground. Sophia jumped out of the elevator and clapped her hands. The 2 people who were thrown down had fainted, but the one in Sudbai's hand was still jumping around and struggling. Sudbai stretched out his hand and took off this guy's mask. He looked pretty good and looked like a standard Western young man. However, Sudbai still slapped him on the face with 2 slaps, one on the left and one on the right. The guy fainted immediately. He went over and was thrown to the ground by Sudbai. After sorting out his clothes and trousers, Sudbai looked at Sophia in front of him and asked, "What should I do next? Do you want to break in?" Sophia shook her head. Click. 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 The walls on all sides suddenly sank, and then the neon lights of the dance floor flashed over. The surrounding area was completely a dance floor. At this time, nearly 200 people were sitting on the sofas on the dance floor. The noisy dance floor and these people in suits and leather shoes, the image produced a very sharp contrast. Moreover, everyone is holding either a knife or a gun in their hands. Everyone is wearing a mask, but their eyes and attention are also gathered here. Sudbai subconsciously put his hands on his waist. To be honest, even as a listener in this kind of scene, he felt a little weak. Of course, what Sudbai felt most weak about was the $40 he had just traded from Sophia. The bullet hasn't warmed up yet, so it needs to be used again. At this time, a tall man wearing a mask and evening dress sitting on the round table in the center slowly stood up and walked over. As he walked, he took out his mobile phone and shook it gently into the void. Finger. This should tell people to turn off signal blocking equipment. The man put the phone to his ear. Then, Sophia's cell phone rang. Sophia looked at the incoming call notification on her mobile phone screen with a bitter smile on her lips. "Who is he?" Sudbai asked. "My boss, the one who gave me the notice." "Oh," Sudbai nodded, "are you also an audience?" "Yes," Sophie responded. "If you are an audience, you don't have to worry about anything. If you are an ordinary person, Sudbai is really unwilling to have any scuffle. If everyone is an audience, before Sudbai kills his parents and does nothing evil in London, the other party will. You can't take action against yourself either. My dear Sophia, this is a party I prepared for you. You know what kind of blood I am and how much I love this blood, so I want to give you a surprise and let you come and see my hands. The club that was created. The man's voice was a little hoarse, but also very charming. A woman came over carrying 2 glasses of bright red liquid. Come, dear Sophia, have a drink. After drinking this glass of wine, you will become a member of our club. Sophia's expression remained unchanged. She picked up the wine glass and was about to drink it all in one gulp when Subai suddenly put his hand on Sophia's shoulder. Wait a minute. Oh. Do our friends from the East have any opinions? Don't worry, your cup is here. Subai smiled and took his own glass, but he was not in a hurry to drink it. Instead, his nails scratched his palm, and 2 drops of his own blood fell into the wine glass. When Subai's blood dripped in, the cup suddenly began to boil, and then one after another bloody worms began to crawl out crazily. Sophia's expression suddenly changed. She retreated behind Subai, opened the vines around her body, and sternly questioned the masked man in front of her. You actually want to control me? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 169. Different from Sophia's angry mood, Subai continued to look at the wine glass in his hand curiously. The worms running out one after another were so cute in Subai's eyes. As a vampire who obtained vampire blood through unorthodox methods, Subai's vampire ability was very limited. As for vampire magic, there was no other way to obtain it. The one in front of you, if nothing else, should be a variant branch of blood magic. Your own blood is introduced into it, and then people drink it, which can then act as a threat and control. This technique is great. This was Subai's own inner thought, which was completely different from the angry Sophia standing in front of him. Zolun, what do you mean by this? You are my boss and my senior on the radio. I want you to give me an explanation for that glass of blood wine. Otherwise, today, at worst, we will completely break up. It's you anyway. If you try to attack me first, I have absolute causality to fight back against you. This is a threat. Subai reluctantly put the drink on the ground and clapped her hands. If Sophia really wanted to take action, she would have done it long ago. The man named Zolun, although it was in a curved manner, did not directly cause anything to Sophia. Hurt, but if Sophia takes action against him, there is absolutely the last word, and then makes this matter bigger, the greater the causal relationship Zolun will bear in the end, which will directly affect Zolun's next story world. The task difficulty is measured here. Perhaps, when I was in the same story world as this woman before, this woman's strength was obviously higher than others, so it concealed some aspects of her innocence and stupidity. Since people dare to use this method against you, how can they be afraid of your threat? Sure enough, Zolun just opened his hands and smiled, then picked up the glass of wine, shook it, and then spit in it. All the worms dissolved and dissipated in an instant, exuding an extremely attractive fragrance. Fragrance. This is a wine worm I raised with my own blood. I brought it to you to taste. You misunderstood me so much. It really hurts my heart. This kind of wine worm will dissolve on its own when it comes into contact with saliva. Subai raised his eyebrows slightly. No, he was lying. Since these wine bugs were bred with his blood and essence, they are definitely in tune with him. He can dissolve them with saliva if he wants. It is indeed very simple. Of course, it does not rule out that the other party is really luxurious and goes to such extremes in pursuit of enjoyment. Rude, but the possibility is too low. But at least the other party used this method to resolve all previous causal relationships. Sophia's face was still gloomy. She turned around and said directly, I will report you to the superiors. Haha, feel free. Zolun didn't seem to care about Sophia's report. However, he took another look at Subai. Apparently, he saw something from the scene where Subai dripped his own blood and inspired the worm to appear. Sophia turned around and walked directly back to the elevator. Subai hesitated for a moment, but looking at the surrounding environment, it had to be said that this club was very attractive to him, but staying here now was definitely not a wise choice. Even ignoring the natural antagonism between the Eastern and Western audiences, it seems a bit taken for granted that Sophia, one of their own, was almost tricked before, and that he was trying to gain any benefits by continuing to stay here. When Subai also walked into the elevator, Sophia, who had been lowering her head, said, "I thought you wouldn't come back with me." "I think so too," Subai replied honestly. Sophia glanced at Subai meaningfully. "It's not just as simple as being curious and interested in vampires." Haha, Subai smiled. The elevator door opened and the two walked out of the wine cellar. The hobbit boss at the bar disappeared and was replaced by a female boss. Sophia got on her motorcycle. Subai stood next to her and hesitated for a moment. She really didn't dare to get on it. This woman was obviously emotionally aroused now. It was very likely that she would step on the accelerator and race like hell. Subai really didn't want to accompany her. "Don't you need me to take you back to the hotel?" "No, I'll take a taxi back myself." Sophia whizzed away without saying a word. Subai touched the tip of his nose and found a piece of paper under his feet. He kicked the paper away with his feet. Under the paper, there was a badge, which was the badge of the Vampire Club. With another kick, Subai kicked the badge into the sewer on the side of the road. Subai put his hands in his waist pockets and started walking along the old street. The ancient streets of London are indeed very interesting to a person who has been living in the Oriental cultural circle. Anyway, the little guy has Jixiang watching over him in the hotel, so Subai doesn't have to worry about anything, and he can have some leisure time. It's daytime now, so I haven't seen any occupations like wandering warblers yet, but there are many employees at restaurants or museums and memorial halls busy distributing flyers. Subai walked forward, and at the corner in front, a church appeared. The church was not very big, and even compared to most churches in Europe, it looked much shabby. It was a bit like the difference between a key hospital and a community medical service station. On the bench at the door of the church, there was a little boy sitting. The little boy was wearing priest's clothes. His childish face was incompatible with the serious clothes. Subai stopped in front of the little boy and realized that the little boy was actually blind. This surprised Subai because he only discovered this when he got closer. The little boy had always had his eyes open before, but he was still blind. It didn't give people the impression that his eyes were empty. It wasn't until he got closer that he realized that the little boy's pupils were actually unfocused. "Sir, do you believe in God?" Subai shook his head. After waiting for a while, seeing that the little boy didn't reply, I suddenly felt a little speechless. I walked over and he could call me sir, but now I couldn't see myself shaking my head. "Do not believe. Those who do not believe in God are the happiest." The little boy crossed himself and made the sign Amen. Subai sat down next to the little boy, crossed his legs, put one hand on the little boy's shoulder and asked, "Your answer is quite unconventional." The little boy nodded and said seriously, "The church is short of funds. So we need to use this kind of reply and method to attract the attention of tourists and make them interested in entering this small church and taking a look." "Why are you speaking so bluntly to me?" Subai asked. "What we need is believers and donations, but we don't dare to let the devil step in," the little boy replied seriously. "Am I the devil?" The little boy said nothing. "Then do you know that if you go down this street, there will be a group of devils gathering not far away?" The little boy remained silent. There is an old saying in China that those who are close to red are red and those who are close to ink are black. Anyone who can be neighbors with a group of devils will definitely not be God. The little boy remained silent, jumped down from the pew, and walked back to the church, seemingly following his memory. Sudbai looked at this shabby church, hesitated for a moment, and then walked in. Inside the church, there are only a few rows of seats, and they are very old. Right in front, there is a black curtain. Sudbai remembered that he often saw this kind of plot in some Western novels or film and television works. There should be a person sitting here. The priest then walked over alone and said devoutly, "Father, I am guilty. Just do as the Romans do." Sudbai walked over and sat down on the chair next to him. The black curtain was in front of him. After a short moment of silence, Sudbai finally spoke. "I just came to London to see a doctor and relax. Why are you going to so much trouble? Is what you said true?" A hoarse voice came from inside the curtain. "What do you think?" Sudbai stretched out his hand and pulled down the curtain. There was a priest sitting inside. The priest had his back to Sudbai and his figure looked a little old. "It's fun to pretend to look like who?" Sudbai took out a cigarette, lit it and joked, "You must have been in Hollywood before you became an audience." The priest stood up. As he stood up, his whole body became taller, and his temperament also changed suddenly, becoming sharp and fierce. At the same time, he turned around and faced Sudbai. There is still a mask on his face. Sudbai didn't know if he had just finished his performance at the club and ran to the set before he could take off his makeup, or if he felt that wearing this mask suited his personality or something. Zolun took off his mask, revealing a pretty face. Of course, this kind of pretty face is suitable for Westerners. His eyes were blue and looked very deep. At this time, Sophia, who was holding a folder in one hand and coffee in the other, also came over, sat down on the bench on the other side, and looked at Sudbai with a scrutinizing gaze. Sudbai didn't touch the two Hellfire shotguns on his waist. There was no point in threatening him with the gun at this time, because the bullets were exchanged through Sophia. Since she exchanged the bullets for herself, it was impossible not to go to Wadian. Check out the information on that gun. After blowing out a smoke ring, Sudbai's vision began to become a little blurry. He didn't know why these people took so much trouble to test him not long after he got off the plane and arrived in London. Sudbai thought that he was not a big shot. He is not qualified to accept such careful and repeated tests. Zolun pursed his lips. After taking off his mask, he could not hide some emotions. Sophia's breathing became heavier at this time. There were also many other smells around. Obviously, the person who was ambushing was really unlucky. Phew. However, they are very serious, and at the same time, there is a touch of fear in their seriousness. "Mistress of the Black Cat, what are you doing here?" Zolun asked slowly, as if he was afraid of disturbing Sudbai. Sudbai calmly continued to smoke. "But in my heart, 10,000 grass and mud horses galloped past. Auspicious, Lychee, What had Lychee done in London or in this area to make them feel so vulnerable? How could he, a small character with a task completion level of only 2, deliberately put on a show to test him? Silence. Silence. Sudbai continued to smoke. The scene continued to be silent. Finally, Sudbai shook the cigarette ashes gently and said calmly, "Haha, there are some things, do you think you are qualified to know?" Then, silently in my heart, I gave myself a thumbs up. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 170. In fact, Sudbai didn't really suspect that this was a test at first, nor did he think that it was a stage play deliberately set up for him. She was already in the elevator when Sophia called her and asked her to open the door, and when Sophia's phone rang, she invited Sudbai to follow her to the vampire club. Sudbai originally thought that this was his luck. After all, he was not Sherlock Holmes, and he was not that insightful. However, the other party seemed to be too cautious about him, a little too cautious, or in other words, they were a little panicked. A little too panicked. When they found themselves, oh no, When they found out that Jixiang had followed them off the plane to London, they immediately couldn't sit still. In unrehearsed scenes, there are always many places that make people feel that something is wrong. Play. With the continuous coincidence time and time again, it is no longer so simple that it can be taken for granted as a coincidence. In fact, the most obvious point is Sophia's IQ. A woman who could stay awake in the forest story world of reincarnation, after entering the bar, showed step by step that her IQ was suppressed to a level that made Subai feel a little weird. A person may suddenly have an enlightenment, which makes sense. But if a person suddenly becomes stupid for no reason, and he doesn't become stupid when he suffers a heavy blow to the brain, then it is worth pondering. In fact, the real reason is that no matter how smart a person is, they have specializations in their art. Sophia is not an actor after all. Moreover, even a very good professional actor can act in a hastily written script without even reading the script. I started filming according to circumstances, and there would always be many stumbling blocks and a lot of irregularities. When Sophia rushed out on her motorcycle like a wronged little daughter-in-law, Subai felt a toothache, and it was really difficult for her. The other party did not obviously show that kind of malice, and this is the real world. Unless Subai kills people and sets fire in London, other listeners will not take action against him. Since it has no impact on his life and safety for the time being, Subai is too lazy to go. If you continue to argue with them, there is no need to expose it. However, when Subai wanted to walk by himself just to relax, he actually encountered the second scene that the department hastily constructed. It was a horror broadcast. When constructing a story world, there will be some violations. Where is the place, let alone thought? The other party was so persistent, and Subai was really curious. What was so special about him that he deserved such a grand reception from that department? Okay, now things are clear. In fact, what they care about is not themselves, but the original owner of Jixiang. The fat man has to nod and bow down to pretend to be his grandson when he sees her. That woman should have done something here to leave them with it cast a deep psychological shadow, and they probably didn't know that the woman had actually gone somewhere long ago. Haha, there are some things, do you think you are qualified to know? When Subai said these words, the scene fell into deathly silence. Zolun closed his eyes silently, and Sophia slowly closed the document in her hand. Subai continued to sit there like an old god, the clouds were calm and the wind was gentle. In the end, Sophia stood up and looked at Subai. I just want to ask, has she arrived in London? I do not know about this. Subai's answer was to tell the truth. God knows where she is now. She originally told herself that she would leave for half a year, at least half a year. Now, let alone whether she is in London, she doesn't know whether she is in this real world or not. However, Subai's tone and attitude in his answer seemed to be deliberately trying to hide the truth. Sophia lowered her head, picked up the coffee, took a sip, and then said with some relief, "Forget it, it's probably a false alarm." Zolun took a deep look at Sophia and said, "Even if it is a false alarm, we must take it seriously." Sophia pointed at Subai, "Since the black cat is following him, it proves that his relationship with the black cat's mistress is indeed extraordinary, but his task completion rate is really not very high. That woman can do anything like she did before. She doesn't care if she does things with scruples, no matter how big the cause and effect is, but he can't." Subai tilted his head slightly and looked at Sophia. From the tone of his voice, it seemed like he was being despised. Zolun took a deep breath, exhaled it heavily, turned around, and chose to leave directly. When Zolun left, the people who were originally ambushing around the church also left together. Sophia and Subai were the only two people left in the church. Subai stretched out and asked, "Is that blind boy the extra performer you were looking for?" Sophia shook her head, "He is Zoran's son." "Oh, I'm sorry," Subai apologized politely. He doesn't hesitate to let his son participate in this arranged test. Is it necessary to spend so much money? I'll take you back to the hotel. Sophia looked at Subai and said, I'm really taking you back this time. Your appointment at the Institute of Psychology is tomorrow. I will also accompany you. Just treat me as a tour guide after London. Although we know that what we do now is very powerless and pale, we still have to find something to do. Or is it because of her? It's because of her. Subai shrugged. What on earth did that woman do here to scare these people into a state of nervousness? After walking out of the church, it was no longer a motorcycle parked outside, but a high-end car. Subai sat in the passenger seat and Sophia drove. Drive slowly, Subai reminded. Ken. Sophia started the car, and it really drove very slowly this time, and it felt extremely comfortable. By the way, can you tell me what she did to this place? Subai finally couldn't suppress his inner curiosity. Sophia did not answer directly, but asked, do you usually watch football games? Occasionally. Which team was the last Premier League champion? Leicester City, Subai replied. The last Premier League championship suffered a big upset. The grassroots team Leicester City created a miracle and a myth. It snatched the league championship from many Premier League giants and caused a sensation. If I told you it wasn't Leicester City, would you believe it? What do you mean? Subai had already fallen into deep thought. The last championship was actually a team called Sailor City. Sailor City? Sailor City? Does this team exist in the Premier League? Subai's palms trembled slightly, and he suddenly thought of some possibility, some terrible possibility. That time, she came, probably to seek revenge. Her enemy is a big family in Sailor City, with many families. We still don't know what the hatred is. After asking her to kill that person, she's still feeling that it was not enough. He finally destroyed the entire city. Mariner City is just a small town, but the team here is very famous. It is also a strong team in the Premier League. It has won the Premier League championship several times and is also very famous internationally. However, because she destroyed that city, that team was naturally destroyed. In order to eliminate the impact of the terrorist broadcast, the city was simply wiped out, erasing all traces of the city's existence. In other words, in this world, only the people who were in the audience before the day she destroyed the city knew that there once was a city on Earth, in England, east of London, called Sailor City. You don't know because you became a listener after that day. At this moment, Subai finally understood why these British people wanted to face her like a formidable enemy. Obviously, when she came to Britain, she should have brought Jixiang with her, so this time the British audience saw that the black cat came with him. That's why he was so panicked. However, if you think about it from another person's perspective, Jixiang's former owner came to England, destroyed a city, and then returned. What kind of cause and effect is this? And he's not dead yet, he just said he would be gone for half a year. This couldn't help but make Subai's love for that woman even deeper. She was really terrifying. We're here. Sophia stopped the car in front of the hotel. Thanks. Subai got out of the car and walked into the elevator. Before he could enter the room, the call came. It was Chu Zhao. Subai frowned, but still answered the phone. Subai. Chu Zhao was obviously drunk again. Tell me quickly, why did Xiaowai commit suicide, and why the hell am I in your house? Hurry, tell me now. If you weren't my brother, I could bring a gun over and kill you. At worst, I would be caught guilty of murder and eat a few peanuts. Now I just want you to give me an explanation, give me a reason. Really, Subai? Give me an explanation, give me a reason. Please Subai, I really beg you, for the sake of my past kindness, please give me an explanation. My heart is bitter, my heart is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. Hearing Chu Zhao's crying words on the other end of the phone, Subai bit his lips. The elevator door opened, but he did not go to his room, but leaned against the cold wall of the corridor. However, in the end, Subai didn't say anything or give any explanation. He just nodded hard and hung up the phone. Subai squatted down and stroked his face with one hand, forcing himself to calm down. Then he shook his head with a smile, and the corners of his eyes turned slightly red. Chu Zhao. Do you still remember? I stole your gun and shot and killed my roommate. But when you came to my dormitory, my roommate died of a heart attack, and not a single bullet in your gun was missing. Hee. How should I explain it to you? How on earth should I explain this? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 171. In the early morning, when the doorbell rang, Subai was still lying in bed. Last night, he and the little guy watched cartoons until late at night. The little guy didn't want to sleep until he finished watching the series, which made Subai fall asleep too. Early in the morning, lifting the quilt, Subai saw that the little guy was still sleeping soundly on his belly, sucking his thumb, and his white and tender little arms and legs looked very cute. The kid was very cute, and he didn't wet the bed or cry. Every time he wanted to go to the toilet, he would pull Subai's hand and yell a few times, and Subai would hug him and shush him. Hush, sometimes Subai is far away. For example, last night at midnight when Subai was sitting on the sofa drinking red wine and watching the news, he looked away slightly and saw Jixiang holding the little guy up by his pants. When I go to the bathroom to use the toilet, the little guy cooperates very well. Although Jixiang is just a cat, it is more than enough to take care of the little guy. He gently picked up the little guy from his belly and put it on the bed. Jixiang, who was sleeping on the bedside, opened his eyes and saw Subai getting up. He knew that the time had come for him to occupy the little guy all by himself, so he came over immediately. The little guy curled up and lay down next to him. The cat's tail was wagging and stroking the little guy's body. Seeing Jixiang doting on this little guy so much, Subai couldn't help but feel funny, and suddenly wanted to find out whether Jixiang was a male cat or a female cat. To be honest, Subai hadn't noticed this until now. After all, he and Jixiang, the relationship is not that of an ordinary owner and pet. Jixiang will not say that one day he suddenly ran to Subai's feet and rolled over, exposing his belly and acting coquettishly to Subai. Wearing pajamas, Subai walked to the door. There was a monitor at the door, and he could see who was outside the door. It was Sophia. This woman. Yesterday, I said I would come and accompany me to the Institute of Psychology, and today I actually came. To be honest, Subai didn't want to have too much interaction with the Western audience. The other party now viewed him more because of the deterrent aspect of Lychee. In fact, there was more hatred between Lychee and them. It was just that Lychee had it was done too harshly and too cruelly, causing this kind of hatred to be sublimated and turned into an emotion that turned into a sly one. Subai knew how much he weighed, and it was enough to play around with the mystery a little. If he really wanted to get involved and had the mentality of fishing in troubled waters, then he might not even know how he died. After all, others not a fool either. Opening the door, Sophia was holding several thermos boxes in her hands. The breakfast I brought you is Chinese breakfast. I bought it in Chinatown. Thank you, but there is Chinese food in the hotel. The food cooked in the hotel is not authentic. Sophia walked straight to the living room, put the breakfast box on the coffee table, opened it carefully, and put the chopsticks and spoons in place. Chinese food is healthy, I usually like to eat it, I can also cook it. Okay, Subai smiled, walked to the bedroom, and picked up the little guy. The little guy woke up in a daze and subconsciously put his arms around Subai's neck. Get up and have breakfast. Afterwards, Subai hugged the little guy and went to the bathroom together. Of course the little guy didn't know how to brush his teeth, so Subai gave him some mouthwash to show him off. Anyway, he was smart enough and wouldn't swallow the mouthwash stupidly. After the little guy spit out the mouthwash, Subai put him in the bathtub with a toothbrush in his mouth and started to pour hot water. Jixiang also came over at this time, using the cat's paws to press shower gel, shampoo, and the like. The little guy slapped the water with a smile. Then Jixiang squatted next to the bathtub and used his paws to give the little guy a bath. After Subai finished washing himself, Jixiang also finished washing the little guy. The water in the bathtub was released and the nozzle started to spray water to wash away the foam on the little guy. Subai wrapped the little guy in a big bath towel, and then carried him to the living room. "A very cute child, is he your illegitimate son, Su?" "It's my son." Subai nodded and put the little guy on the sofa. Sophia seemed to be bursting with maternal love at this time. She came over specially, picked up a siomai with chopsticks, blew it gently, and then brought it to the little guy's mouth. The little guy ate happily. He still liked to be served by others, although Subai usually put the meal on the table for him to twist his buttocks and grab something to eat. Jixiang has never been interested in human food, but he still deliberately took out a small quilt from the bedroom, delivered it to the little guy, and then went back to the bedroom by himself. When she saw Jixiang coming out, Sophia's expression was not very good, and that great fear completely filled her heart. Of course, Subai also understood this. If he were in another position, he would probably be similar to Sophia. "Is he your and her child?" Sophia asked again. Obviously, Sophia had other speculations from Jixiang's attitude of taking care of the little guy. She felt that the little guy was the child of Subai and Lizzie. If this was the case, then Subai, who had only a task completion score of 2, would have Jixiang. If you follow him, it will make sense. In Subai's mind, the image of lychee being so cold that it would repel people thousands of miles away came to mind. It was really difficult for her to have a baby, so she didn't answer the question. Subai first took a bun and dipped it in some vinegar and started to eat it. When they were almost done eating, Subai turned on the TV, gave the remote control to the little guy, then changed his clothes and went out. Sophia followed Subai out. When the door closed, Subai saw Sophia let out a long sigh of relief. "It's hard for you too." "It's okay, this is good for improving my mood." Sophia looked at it openly. The car was parked outside the hotel. It was the same car as yesterday. Sophia was driving and Subai was sitting in the passenger seat. After the car started moving, Sophia threw a piece of information to Subai. "What is it?" Subai turned over casually. "We know the identity of the person who made the appointment for you, but she is not qualified to make an appointment with the top doctor in that institute. I made a new appointment for you. She is one of the directors of the institute and a master in the field of psychology. One of his tasks is to regularly check the president's mental condition. Haha, it's really pitiful to be your president. He can't be mentally ill." After Subai said this, he couldn't help but smile a little. He seemed to be too involved in it. It was a pity that he didn't have a mental illness. In fact, sometimes mental illness is quite satisfying. Most people live their daily lives. There are all kinds of rules and regulations to restrain themselves, various interests and relationships, etc. How many people can do whatever they want without caring? The institute is located in a place that looks similar to an old castle. The entrance is heavily guarded, giving it the feel of a semi-national unit. This is the castle of Earl Edward, whose family has been promoting the study of psychology since his great-grandfather. Edward himself is the man who is going to treat you today. This acting studio is not a hospital, so there is no outpatient registration process, and ordinary people cannot come here to see a doctor. After all, whether it is a capitalist society or China, class distinctions are still very obvious. Subai was sitting in a study room. Sophia went out to help Subai make contact. The waiter brought coffee and snacks. There are many books and famous paintings in the study. Subai walked back and forth with a cup of coffee to look at them. He was actually not very worried about his condition. If he was an ordinary person and wanted to continue to live a stable life, then this mentality, the disease does need to be cured as soon as possible, but Subai will continue to enter the story world in the future. In that ghost place, even if he is cured, it will be difficult not to relapse, just like a person who has just been cured of a bad cold. In the blink of an eye, he was locked in the ice cellar again. There was a painting in the study that seemed familiar to Subai. The painting was of a small slope on the grassland. On the slope, there was a back view of a woman and a child sitting on the grass. The setting sun was diagonally behind her. The whole portrait showed a very beautiful emotion. Subai couldn't help but stretched out his hand to touch the woman in the portrait, but at this moment a stern voice came from behind him. "Stop it, rude sir." Subai was stunned for a moment, turned around, and saw an old man wearing white clothes. Sophia stood next to the old man with an embarrassed look on her face. "Sophia, is this the guest you booked for me? He actually dared to touch my painting with his hands. Do you know how much this painting means to me?" The old guy was still chattering, while Subai stood aside slightly embarrassed, but his eyes still fell on the painting. Sophia was constantly comforting the old man, and even named other people, obviously putting pressure on the old man to stop being so willful. Finally, the old gentleman walked up to Subai and asked, "Where are your medical records?" Subai shrugged, "I don't have medical records." The old gentleman took a deep breath, "It's really troublesome. Do you want me to check your mental condition from the most basic level? My time is very precious, Sophia." However, he only complained a few times angrily, and finally sat down and motioned for Subai to sit over. Sophia silently exited the study. The old gentleman looked into Subai's eyes and remained motionless. Subai also looked into his eyes and remained motionless. Gradually, Subai suddenly found that the old gentleman's eyes seemed to have turned into a whirlpool, and he slowly began to sink into it. An instinct that he had experienced many times in life and death made Subai subconsciously start to alert himself and at the same time had to control his impulse to fight back. The old gentleman closed his eyes and stretched out his hand to rub the bridge of his nose. When he opened his eyes again, there was a hint of seriousness on his face. "Actually, sir, you shouldn't come to my institute. You should be sent to Guantanamo. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 172. Guantanamo Prison is a prison established by the US military at the Guantanamo base in January 2002. The detention camp contains captured enemy combatants, and the unit responsible for the operation of the camp is the Guantanamo Joint Task Force. Mr. Edward meant that it would be better for Subai to go to jail directly if he came to receive psychological treatment. Subai picked up a spoon, added a piece of sugar to his coffee, and remained silent. This old gentleman is not a listener. Perhaps, there really are such ordinary people in this world who can possess abilities beyond the basic categories of ordinary people without relying on external improvements, just by relying on their own study and research. For example, from the exchange of glances just now, the other party can see something. Actually, you don't need to come to me for any treatment at all. You are very aware of your psychological problems, and you are a little happy with it. Edward reached out to lift his glasses, then stood up. I don't understand why Sophia would introduce me to a person who regards violence and blood as the joy of life. My research is dedicated to the inner peace of human beings, not to provide psychological massage to those criminals with bloody hands." Subai continued to remain silent. The old man had too much personality and Subai didn't want to force him. In fact, Edward was right. He was not very urgent about solving this psychological problem. Edward did not leave directly, but walked to the painting that Sudbai was looking at before. He looked at the people in the painting, looking a little sad. This time, Sudbai spoke. The painting is good, a work by an Oriental painter. Although it is an oil painting, the protagonist is obviously a mother and son, and they are of Oriental origin, so the painter is probably an Oriental as well, and he is probably the husband of the woman in the painting and the father of the child in the painting. Edward took off his glasses and wiped the lenses. He is the only best friend I have in my life. Although we have different beliefs and ideas, this does not affect our mutual appreciation. I understand, as we say there, this is called gay love. Edward obviously didn't understand the meaning of the word gay. After putting his glasses back on, he sighed and turned around. Sir, do you still need to continue seeing a doctor? If you don't want to. No, I didn't say I didn't want to. As a doctor, I have always believed that we should have the right to lose our temper. Otherwise, facing so many patients with negative energy all day long, doctors would first become mentally ill. While talking, Edward sat down again. I will ask you some questions next, can you promise to answer them truthfully? It depends. Edward was non-committal about Sudbai's reaction, but Sudbai could see that his eyes were a little red, not because of the sadness of looking at the portrait, but because they looked at each other before. Can you tell me about your family situation? Sudbai took a sip of coffee and said directly without any hesitation or concealment. When I was 7 years old, both my parents died in an accident. Edward nodded and leaned on the sofa. This time, he did not look into Sudbai's eyes, but stared at Sudbai's hands and continued to ask. So, who did you live with after that? I live alone, and the money my parents left me is enough for me to live on. Where are your relatives? It's not very close. I'm used to living alone. Where are your friends? Not much. Oh. Edward stopped talking, Sudbai stopped talking, and the scene suddenly fell into silence. At this time, Edward's cell phone rang. He said sorry to Sudbai and then hung up. Immediately afterwards. Stay silent. Sudbai continued to sit there calmly drinking coffee. Although he had never sought psychological treatment before, it was definitely not a normal psychological treatment method like Edward's. Finally, Edward sighed. From the moment I entered this room, I have been observing your every move. Your heart is private to you, but the changes and fluctuations in your heart will be reflected in many subtle movements of your body. In fact, you are very normal. For you, you are very normal. You can face your own psychological problems calmly. No, this may not be a problem, it may be your nature, a kind of. At this time, Edward's cell phone rang again. This time he did not hang up, but picked up the phone and answered it. Then, his expression suddenly changed, he stood up and said to Sudbai. Excuse me for now. I have a rather urgent matter that I need to deal with right now. It doesn't matter. Seeing Edward leaving in a hurry, Sudbai felt a little confused. Except for the initial eye contact, before and after, Edward did not make Sudbai feel that the other person was a psychiatrist. Instead, he felt more like a charlatan. Maybe this is a kind of free and easy attitude of an expert, but being so free and easy as a doctor will always make patients feel a little perfunctory. After Edward left, Sophia opened the door and walked in. Does it have any effect? The effect is that I drank 2 cups of coffee and now I'm going to go to the bathroom. Sudbai got up and walked out of the study. The castle was very large, and the building area was also very large. Sudbai didn't see a bathroom until he reached the end of the corridor on this floor. It was very narrow, with only a pit and a urinal inside. It's actually made of wood, and you can smell something while standing outside. Sometimes, Sudbai really can't understand some people's quirks. Maybe this is a tradition they insist on? Sudbai walked into the bathroom, but at this moment, Subai suddenly found that there were several handprints or footprints on the wall of the bathroom. The pattern of the footprints and handprints was very strange. It was not the kind that someone was bored enough to print here, but more like who once struggled here and left traces behind. Not long after Edward left, he hurried back and happened to pass by the bathroom door. When Subai came out, she happened to see Edward's hurried back. "It's really boring," Subai murmured to himself. Now, Subai had no hope at all for this psychological treatment. He planned to say hello to Sophia and go back directly, and lie on the bed with the little guy to watch. Watching cartoons is more enjoyable than spending time in this castle. However, when Subai also walked out, Sophia and Edward returned with a solemn expression on the other side of the aisle. It seemed that Edward came back specifically to find Sophia. Sophia looked at Subai and said apologetically, "Su, I'm sorry, today's treatment has to be cancelled. I have something to do now, can you drive my car back by yourself?" "Okay." Subai nodded and took the car key from Sophia. Edward didn't say hello to Subai anymore, and kept gesturing for Sophia to follow him quickly. It was obvious that the matter was urgent. Something must have happened in the castle, but Subai didn't care. He was not interested in making a fortune in Westerners' territory, nor did he want to mess around in unfamiliar territory. He put his hands on the railings of the corridor, seeing that the guards who were outside were running towards the inside. They all had a look of panic on their faces. Subai walked down the stairs and walked out of the castle. He went directly to Sophia's car, opened the door, and got in. Just as Subai was about to start the car, suddenly, a voice appeared in Subai's mind. "He, you are different from them. Oh no, there is another woman who is also different from everyone else. But I think you are more interesting. You actually came to see a doctor. It's so fun." Subai glanced around and found that there was no one. The guards and doctors had already entered the castle. Now he was alone in such a spacious place. Knocking his knuckles lightly on the steering wheel, Subai definitely didn't believe that he was hearing hallucinations. He was mentally ill but not insane. How could he have auditory hallucinations? Forget it, let's not get involved in right and wrong. Subai turned the steering wheel to the left, then stepped on the accelerator. The car turned around and drove directly towards the outer gate of the castle. If he encountered this kind of thing in the story world or in China, Subai would definitely actively participate in it, but here, his identity is a bit special. Those Westerners are now a little afraid of his identity, but after all, it's not Lychee. Lychee can make those people unable to even feel fear. Subai can't. When Subai's car opened the door, suddenly, the voice sounded again. He, if you drive further, you won't be able to hear my voice. Can't you just talk to me? Subai smiled and honked the horn. "Little sister, brother is very busy. I'll take you home to see the little goldfish another day." The guards outside had already gone inside the castle, but there were still people guarding the guard booth at the gate. When they saw Subai driving Sophia's car out, the other party immediately pressed the button and opened the gate. No matter what kind of ghost is in this castle, it can actually ignore a certain distance and speak directly to people's hearts. Subai is not willing to deal with it. He has already thought about it and will tell Suner about it in 2 days. The treatment is not suitable for him and he will return to China. The horror broadcast will be suspended for more than a month. Subai also needs to find a quiet place to rest himself. There is no delay in making a decision. This is Subai's style. However, just as Subai's car drove out, the voice sounded again. "Grandpa Edward likes the painting in the study very much. In fact, I also like it very much. However, don't you think? Does that little boy's back look somewhat similar to yours?" Brake. Subai slammed on the brakes, and the car made a harsh friction sound. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 173. The appearance of the castle and the office area are basically kept to the original style as much as possible. After all, not many castles of this kind have been preserved intact in the whole of Europe. The Edward family has not yet fallen into poverty, and the economic situation has always been good. And therefore, the castle is a symbol of his and his ancestors' status and glory, so it is naturally impossible to demolish this place and build a modern research institute. Of course, the interior of the castle, that is, the deeper layers of the castle, have undergone relatively large changes. This is in the core research project area, and naturally it is necessary to maintain 100% rigor and modernization. Psychological research is not done behind closed doors. It also requires constant experiments and inferences. Therefore, these places actually look very similar to those physical and chemical laboratories, but they are much softer. In today's era, everything has entered the digital age. Various sports have also joined the data analysis system, and psychology is no exception. In an all-glass airtight room, 3 scientific researchers wearing white clothes were lying on the ground and crawling back and forth, like geckos. They looked very funny and weird, and they would appear from time to time. Stick out your tongue and lick the ground or glass. Surrounded by the rest of the scientific researchers, they kept a certain distance from the glass house. At the same time, there were security personnel armed with firearms on guard outside. Edwards Research Institute was regarded as a semi-national unit, so the security level would be given the green light. Sophia and Edward stood at the front. Edward had a gloomy look on his face, while Sophia seemed much more indifferent. Also, as an audience, what weird and incredible things hadn't been seen before? Did she start again? Sophia took the gloves handed by a researcher next to her and put them on her hands. I have been sleeping for almost half a year. I don't know why I woke up just now. The 2 people who were recording physiological signs were directly hypnotized, and then another person went in to check the situation and was also hypnotized. Edward said this with a clear look. Somewhat helpless. Sophia took a few steps forward, but Edward grabbed her hand. Her hypnosis distance is only 5 meters. This is the record we measured when she woke up last time. Now we don't know whether her ability has increased. Sophia looked around and shook her head. It's okay. I'll take a closer look. If she can hypnotize me, it has nothing to do with the distance. As a plant-type enhancer, Sophia also has a natural confidence in her own state of mind and spiritual cultivation. Usually it takes half an hour for her to wake up, and she will automatically fall into a new deep sleep period after half an hour. Edward looked at the record form of the staff around him. There are still about 15 minutes before she should fall into deep sleep again. Several people in the room were just hypnotized and used as her toys, and their lives should not be in danger. Edward turned to everyone around him and shouted. What are you doing standing still? The specimen has woken up for the first time in half a year. Keep an eye on all the recording work and don't allow any mistakes. Yes. Clear. Okay. All staff members also regained their composure and returned to their respective posts to start recording data. But the surrounding security personnel were still observing everything around them calmly. It was the first time for them to see such a thing in their lives, and they were nervous and a little excited. Sophia broke free from Edward's hand, signaled Edward not to worry about her, then walked forward directly, pushed open the glass door, and walked in. In the center of the glass room is a light blue container. The container is filled with nutrient solution. There are many sensors around it. In the nutrient solution, there is a brain that is constantly floating and sinking. Yes, it is a brain living in nutrient solution. It is simply appalling to peel off a person's brain from the body and put it in this container, but Sophia knows that this brain was not stripped and raised by people in the institute, nor was it taken from the UK or other European countries. It is a masterpiece of advanced institutions, but was sent here by a man more than 10 years ago. The development of modern science is changing with each passing day, but it can also be explained from the side. If you push forward, there is actually a clear gap in the level of science and technology in comparison. People who were able to achieve this step more than 10 years ago feel that fear. You are so annoying. Can you please stay away from me? The aura on your body makes me feel so disgusted. I am living on something like a petri dish. There are so many plants on your body. This is not to be related to am I going to steal food? A little girl's voice appeared in Sophia's heart. Sophia was not surprised. The department had examined and analyzed this thing before, but the brain was still sleeping at that time. This was Sophia's first time. Once he saw her waking up, other people in the department would probably come over soon, but Edward said that she would fall asleep soon, and the others would be too late to catch up. Back away, you still come close to me, be careful, I ask Zyobeza to beat you. The female voice was filled with childish anger. The three researchers who were hypnotized and crawling around on the ground suddenly returned to normal, and then immediately left the glass room. Apparently, the three of them were frightened. Zyobeza. Sophia frowned. Perhaps it was the difference in the translation of spoken expressions between Chinese and English that prevented Sophia from figuring out who Zyobeza was referring to. If Sophia were a Chinese woman, she would probably be able to immediately understand who she was referring to. After all, that person had been with her this morning. Why are you so stupid? You haven't arrived yet. I'm really speechless, you're actually lost. Don't wander around, hurry up. Stop making noise, you're annoying. Subai couldn't help but roll his eyes. The little girl kept chattering to him, and he couldn't block his ears. The other party's voice would be clearly transmitted to his heart. This feeling was completely stripped away. Privacy is like having a stranger standing next to you with a DV filming you during sex. The camera lens is only a few centimeters away from your DD. Finally, after going around in circles, Subai finally came to a door that was obviously different from the surrounding decoration pattern. The door was an electronic door and required security verification, which should be fingerprints. It's a very simple setting that serves a symbolic purpose. After all, it's a bit out of date compared to modern security gates. The Institute of Psychology is not a nuclear and biological weapons institute, and terrorists won't say they're going to attack here. Fortunately, there was a security guard standing at the door. Subai walked over and raised his hand to say hello. The other party was stunned for a moment, then walked over and stretched out his hand. Sir, you can't enter here. Before the other party finished speaking, Subai took a step forward and hit the security guard's neck with one hand. The security guard fainted immediately. With Subai's current strength, it was easy to knock out an ordinary person. Relaxing. Subai put the other person's palm on the sensor, and the door opened immediately. Subai poked his head in and walked in. It was quite spacious inside, and most people gathered around the glass house. For a while, no one noticed Subai sneaking in. You finally came in. Oh, I'm so tired. I really want to sleep. If you don't come, I'm really going to sleep. Let me tell you, it takes a long time for people to sleep. I last slept for about half a year. Subai continued to walk inside. At this time, it was a bit impossible to avoid being discovered. The security personnel around him immediately discovered Subai and pointed their guns at him. Edward turned his head in confusion. Subai was the patient introduced by Sophia. His status was very unusual, but for him to come here so ignorantly, it seemed that he had used some unconventional method. Sir, this is not the place you should come. Edward looked at Subai angrily. Subai shrugged and pointed to the glass room. The voice inside asked me to come. I had already left. Sophia also discovered Subai and waved to Subai in the glass room, indicating to let Subai over. She was a little worried that if these people shot Subai or forced Subai to fight back, the institute would be completely destroyed. It was a mess. Generally speaking, Subai would not take the initiative to kill people here, but if his life safety was threatened, he would definitely save his life first. All causal relationships would be forgotten at that time. Edward's face was gloomy, but he still waved his hand. He really didn't want a mentally ill person to enter the scope of his most core and most private research project. Subai walked over and opened the door of the glass house. Sophia looked at Subai with a playful expression. Do you know this is the West? Subai was non-committal. Even though there is that woman behind you, for our own dignity and... Stop talking nonsense, okay? This thing called me here. Subai pointed to the brain in the petri dish, and then took a breath of surprise. This way of existence is so cool. Yes, it's cool. Sophia's face didn't look very good. Haha, you're finally here. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Fortunately, I didn't fall asleep. The little girl's voice sounded cheerful. Okay, I'm here. I want to hear about my parents, Subai said. This was the real reason why he came here. Who knows? At this moment, the girl's voice suddenly turned into the scream of an old and vicious old woman. Gigi, you are finally here. That man isolated me here and caused me to suffer so much pain. I want his son to be buried with him. Buried with him. Buried with him. Subai,